Hi, this is Sky Perry with SSP Innovations, and I'm here today to talk to you about a new and exciting integration we've built between our Workforce Management, or WFM, product and the Cityworks Asset Management System. So we've shown before in a few demos that we've been able to plug in the SSP WFM application within a tab directly within Cityworks. But for my purposes today, I'm actually going to flip out and utilize the full screen application with WFM, which is effectively our own web application, which can be used either as an embedded application within Cityworks or standalone as you see it here. So let's start off with a little bit of background. First, you'll see that I've logged into WFM as Sky Perry. It's using my Windows authentication against Active Directory to know who I am. And then it's using a role, which I am set as an administrator within the system. And that will allow me to do pretty much everything I need to do here today. Now, keep in mind, a typical user would not be an administrator, would not therefore have all of the different permissions to do the things that I'll be doing. So just sort of bear that in mind through the demo today. So we'll start off with a little bit of background on the data that we utilize within Workforce Management. WFM is a capital design tool that allows me to utilize components of work, and they happen to be the same components that are utilized in Cityworks for a work order in their concept of ELM, equipment, labor, and material. But we have those same components here within WFM. So I'll just bring up one here, material component here. We'll go over to a 45-foot Class 2 pole. Now, as I load this up, some very similar information that could be imported from Cityworks at this level. But note that I have a warehouse number, I have information about it, the unit cost, etc., etc. So I have the same concept here for my equipment. If I go in there, we can have everything from an air compressor to, let's say, a bucket truck. You can see those different components there. And finally, we have labor. Now, the main difference between our labor and Cityworks labor and equipment is that we're using generic roles versus Cityworks is often encompassing individual employees who will be working the jobs. So we have the same concepts, though, as far as building these up. Main difference, though, in WFM is that we are rolling these up to a concept of a compatible unit. And a compatible unit, or CU, you'll see me use that term throughout the demo today, is basically the compilation of equipment, labor, and materials. So I'll bring up a OH45, which is a compatible unit code. If I bring that up, you can see that it has multiple components of these individual aspects. So you see up top, we have the materials, we have the equipment, and we have the labor, and we have those joined together. So we're combining the material that is used for the job and the equipment and labor that it takes to complete the job on this screen to allow that to roll up to an OH45. So then we have a total cost as well as can estimate the material, equipment, and labor needed to perform this type of job. We also have the ability to do it based on work function. So an installation, a removal, a transfer could all have different material, equipment, and labor assigned to it. So these are the key components, the building blocks, if you will, for workforce management and WFM on our side. We're going to use this to design a new job. So I'll flip back to my dashboard to start off the workflow. Now, a big part of what we do on the SSP side is focus in on the workflow around designing work. And what Cityworks does best is on the asset management side. So you're going to see several different handoffs via this integration that allow the systems to talk effectively together. So we're going to start off the job on our end. This is a work request. It's not a work order as of yet. And we're going to click this Create New Work Request button. So you can see this pops up and that prompts me for some very basic information. We'll start off with job type. I'm going to use an overhead residential job type, Department of Electric, and budget classification of 182. Now note this generates a generic charge code for me that's assigned to those specific components of the work, and I'm going to be using that charge code for the purposes of designing this job. I don't have a work order yet inside of Cityworks. So I'll fill out some more information here. I'll go ahead and put in a priority. We could put in a customer name. We'll just put in a developer name of Roan Hills, which is where we're doing this job. We could add a customer phone number, etc. Importantly, though, to tie it into Cityworks, we want to enter an address. So I'll put in 4499 Roan Drive. And this is down in Garland, Texas. Put that in, and we'll just put some basic information about what is needed here. It's going to be new service to subdivision. Very basic there. So note here that we are in a status of new and unsaved. So we haven't actually saved this work request into the system yet, but I'll click the Save button now. Now, as this page refreshes, you'll notice a couple of different things. First off, we've been identified with a unique work request number, 97347. We'll note that number for the purposes of the demo. You can also see that our status is now an estimate of new. So Cityworks doesn't know about this job yet. It's just a design estimate where we're going to use those compatible units to do a design. Now, before we jump into a design, let me point out some of these panels down below. And this is where we capture specific information about the job. First one I'll hit on is the comments panel. In here, I could post a comment in. This might be from the customer service rep, something about please contact the developer before performing the site visit. And I can notify anyone in the system here of this comment, or I could just post it to the board so that when they are assigned this job, they have that commentary. We like to centralize that communication, very much like Cityworks does on the work order side, to allow it to be a single place around the design job. Next component is our history. Now, we're automatically capturing quite a bit of history about the job, pretty much every field change within the job, and as we go through, it'll be capturing the status changes of the job as it moves through workflow, etc. So just knows those things are always available to you and always down there on the bottom end so that we can utilize those going forward. Now, if I were to be coming in and just wanted to do a very simple design job, I can flip over to our estimate worksheet. And notice here I could change this name of this estimate. I can create multiple estimates per job if I want to design it in different ways. I'll put manual estimate in for now, and I could put in a scope of work, any other information here. And at the most basic level, I'm able to come in and start editing this estimate. So I'm going to add in a very basic work location. I could do work location number 1 and go and save that into the system. You see that saved there. And I could add multiple work locations sort of in a non-graphical sense, essentially tying to locations where work will be performed in the field. So within that, if I was doing maybe a simple pole replacement, I might come in and I'll do a quick removal of an existing pole. Let's use that same OH45. And we'll use a quantity of 1. We'll leave the other cost factors. We can change costs, by the way, here around traffic, labor, soil, network status, to increase material, really equipment and labor costs based on these other cost factors. But I'll leave them as is for now. I can then add in another simple install of an OH45, and we're just doing a simple replacement of the same component of work. And you can see just that easily it's calculated in the individual cost per the removal, and note different costs for removal and install, as well as the total cost for the job, the material, equipment, and labor breakdown. Now, if I go into an individual install, I can click on that again, and I can see the individual components that make up that cost. So I see the equipment, the bucket truck, pull trailer, etc. I see the material as well as the labor, and that's all tied back to that concept of ELM, but behind the compatible unit. But I only have to put in the OH45 and I get all of those components broken out for me within the WFM system. So very simple to do a design job, a simple design job like this, but there are cases when you may want to do a more advanced design utilizing a map. And of course, we have a number of different choices in the market around graphic work design. And I'm not going to be getting into that too much today, but I do want to simulate that for you. So I'm going to send this design or this estimate over to a graphic design tool. This is effectively handing off this job to an external graphic design tool who would now go apply a graphic design. So you'll note here the estimate is now set to graphic design, indicating an external tool is able to come in and do a design job. So instead of walking you through, I'm going to kind of jump ahead here, and I'm just going to attach an output from one of those systems here. I'll use a job print, and I'm going to select a file here. And you can see I've added a GIS design print. So that's now been added in here. So let's just take a look at what this looks like. Again, attachments are a common panel to each job that we have in the system. And we're able to attach PDFs or Word docs, Excel spreadsheets, etc., and have them available here. So in this case, I've put in a GIS design via a PDF document. And we can see here, this is organized around what we call work locations, location where work is performed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we have the green is showing a design color. So coloration around this, new service points. We have both overhead and underground feeds here, just to give you an idea of a simple job that will have some decent cost behind it. So we have that added now. We'll leave that up there for reference. And I'm going to go and utilize something we've written here just to simulate loading a graphic design into WFM for the estimating purposes. You'll notice this comes back that my status is now changed to Estimate Graphic Design Complete. And we've now imported a new estimate from an external graphic design tool. Now note I still have my original manual estimate, but we're going to work with this default designer estimate for right now. So we'll bring this in here and we'll take a look at what we have down below. Note that we have 6 work locations which tie into the PDF attachment that we had of the graphic map design for the job. But as I open these up, I can see the individual compatible units that make up those components of the job. So at this number 6, we have a transformer, another component of the transformer as well as some secondary. And always remember, I can click on these individual components to see the material, equipment, and labor as they're put in. I have a cost as well per each individual compatible unit, and then the total cost up top. So if I go down there, I can check out each of these individually. Each one has work behind it. So again, here's a fuse and then a piece of primary wire, overhead primary wire going out. So that is brought into the job, and you can see I have a total job cost, etc., all brought within the estimate. I want to show you one other view of that, and that's in our view only mode here on the estimate side. And note that it's a very similar type of tree view, but again, I can break these out, check them out individually, and again, see the components that make up the individual aspects of the work, the elm behind the work, if you will. So I can see that here based on work location and compatible unit. I also have the ability to flip over and see effectively a material summary for the job, and this is going to flip it over and show us the storeroom amounts per warehouse number. And you can see that here. So we have a number of different footages along the job, and I can click on those and see the detail behind each of those as needed. All right, so I've basically attached these. I've got my attachment here, which is the GIS design print. I've got the estimate loaded into the system. This is typically all I need for a new design estimate to submit it for approval to an engineering supervisor. So I'll go and grab a submit for engineering approval task. Now, one thing I didn't note about these tasks earlier is that you'll note that the tasks are changing as I move through the workflow. So it's guiding me through the workflow based on the current status of the job and who I am within the system. Now, I should note that the tasks up top that have 3 stars ahead of them are administrative tasks. And I see those because I'm an administrator, but a typical user might only see these 2 options: send back to the GIS for modification or submit for engineering approval. And that's an easy way that we can guide a user through the workflow within the system. So we'll submit this for engineering approval within the system. And as you guess, I will probably assign it to myself to approve my own work since I'm doing the demonstration today. Now, as the job refreshes, you can see the status is now set to estimate pending design approval, indicating this is now ready to be approved. I would come in as the approver, review the attachments, review the estimates behind the job, and then make a choice. And again, I see different choices now. I could either approve the design or reject the design and send it back to the engineer. For the purposes of today, we'll go ahead and approve the design. Now we see the status has moved to estimate approved. And this is really the first time in our WFM workflow where we're ready to tie this into a Cityworks component. The work has been approved, the design has been approved, it's ready to be submitted and attached to a Cityworks work order. So you can see here that we have a Cityworks work order creation task available to us now based on our current status. And what we're going to do is fire this task off. This will actually take the design job that's been approved with the estimate and bring that into a new Cityworks work order, but it's doing that, of course, automatically. Now we'll note our status has advanced now to dedicate materials, but notice that we now have a work order. We're no longer in an estimate status. But before we go any further, let's check out this same job over in Cityworks. Now behind the scenes, as it submitted that job to Cityworks, it's added a new link for me in my attachment. So Cityworks work order with the Cityworks work order 2389 has been attached to this WFM work request. So as I click that, it now drops into Cityworks. So you see this exact job has been created. We'll notice a lot of information here on the work order section, such as the WFM capital design and the number of 2389, but it's already been assigned a category of electric capital. You can see all the status and information there. As we look down below, it's also been dropped into a standard project as far as the financial costing side, an electric system upgrade. Now up top, the location information has been brought across. The address information is available. Now I, of course, could go ahead and geocode this within Cityworks using the integration to Esri. And we can save that off, and now we have a specific XY tied to this work order. Now note there are no assets assigned to this job at this point in time, and that's because this is a design job for new assets. Those assets may exist in a version or maybe even just on a sketch, but they don't exist in my GIS. And of course, Cityworks being a GIS-based asset management system requires those assets, so they will be available, but they're not available at this point in the workflow. And then finally, note in the upper right, our custom fields here. We've got a simple integration component, and we've got the category set to SSP WFM Integration, and we have our service request number as well as a hyperlink to be able to jump back to the job if we wanted to hyperlink to it from the Cityworks side. Now, the final important and really neat side that I wanted to show you is that we brought across our estimated components for material, equipment, and labor. So if I flip into the material, you'll note that I don't have any actual costs, and that's because no work has been performed as of yet. But WFM has sent over all of the estimated material that was designed from the graphic design side. So here you see all of the estimated material. Now notice, we don't have a hierarchy inside of Cityworks, and that's okay because that's what WFM does well for us. But what we do have is that raw material corresponding to those compatible units, all called out individually, all assigned cost here within Cityworks. So that works quite well. Now note I have the same information available for my labor, showing here the estimated labor for the job. Now these aren't specific employees, of course, as mentioned. These are generic roles, so apprentice line, crew foreman, journeyman line. But we have the estimated cost as well as the assignment for the job. Again, not by work location, but that's not what Cityworks needs. We'll be able to assign this work and bring it in as the individual employees complete it on the back end. And finally, we see it again on the equipment side as well. Here again, estimated equipment, we see all the different components with the hours loaded and the cost for those individual components of the equipment. So again, we got all that information directly in Cityworks. No work on our part. It was just an integration on the back end over from SSP's WFM into Cityworks. So now let's continue on the work inside of WFM. Our next task here would be to actually order and dedicate materials. Now, if we were doing this within a Cityworks integrated system that utilized the storeroom module, we might utilize that module to actually bring in the estimated materials. So this would be a request against the storeroom module to say, hey, here's all the individual components of the material we need. And we want to take that from the storeroom module. But if you're not using storeroom module, that's okay too. We can integrate to a third party or even do something as simple as sending an email to your warehouse. So we'll fill out this form, full order routine. We're going to put a due date in of, let's say, the 6th of December. So we're going to have this delivered to dock number 1 and shed number 2. And with that simple information, I could submit this in. So again, this would be contacting the storeroom module, your independent warehousing module, and or sending an email. So you'll note now that our work request is now ready for operations. And at this point in time, we could assign it to a crew. One more point in time here where we could integrate to Cityworks to grab crew from there. We've built other integrations to components like Click Software, who do significant crew optimization for scheduling. Our status is now released to construction, and this is where a crew would take this job, and they would likely take it from our component here in WFM, where they have, again, an attachment showing the design job via the print, as well as the estimate by work location, showing them all the individual compatible units that have to be installed at each location on the map. So this work is constructed in the field and then is fed back. And typically the crew foreman is the one who takes over the job at this point in time, and he would come into our system and complete the as-builts. Now you'll note our as-builts on our side are really focused on material. The material here is broken up the same way the job was designed, and that's by work location, because that's how the crew has installed the new material. So I'd come in here again and go basically work location by work location, and notice that I have a standard quantity, that was my design quantity, and now I have an as-built quantity, so I can alter any or input any alterations here and confirm this, and now we've got both the 60 estimated and the 70 actual recorded. So I'll put a few more of these in here, and I'll just modify these so they have slightly different cost behind them. I'll go down to the work location number 1, open that up, and we'll just take the large piece of primary there, 545. We'll bump that all the way up to 600 feet. Now, if I didn't install any of this, I could zero this out for the as-built. Again, it doesn't affect the estimate. It only affects the as-built for the material. I also have the ability to add a brand new CU. Let's say at work location number 1, perhaps we installed a new street light. So I'll put in an OH1000 here, and we'll put a quantity of 1 and save that in. Notice that is now added into my work location number 1, and I'm able to utilize it from that point forward. Now for the rest of them, perhaps the as-built quantity will match the estimated quantity, and I have a button there that lets me just sort of blanket set that across the entire job, and notice the check marks are now applied to these others, and the as-built quantity is equal to the estimate quantity. My last few steps here are to come in and my work completed, and I'm going to put in, this was completed by the crew Perry. That's the crew we used. Work was completed, let's say end of that week we were targeting, so the 9th of December. We'll just say complete as designed. Added a new streetlight to work location 1. Something simple like that. Now I'm going to submit these as-built again into SSP's WFM system. This data has now been recorded. Now you'll note my status has advanced to engineering as-built complete. So this is the back office period where we would often utilize to update this job, review this job, QA the job, and to make the GIS as-built posts. So this would be where I'm taking this design job that I showed you on the design print and actually posting it into the as-built side of our GIS, which importantly in this case makes that data available to Cityworks as asset-based data via our integration with either Portal or ArcGIS server. So our next component that we want to do with integration to Cityworks is to send this as-built data over to Cityworks. So we're going to send the as-built information around the material that was actually used, as well as any completion information we had, such as dates. And then finally, we now have the access to that GIS asset-based information, which can now be tagged to that work order inside of Cityworks to allow those assets to be tied to a Cityworks work order for future purposes, or even kicking off cyclical maintenance or inspection activities. So we'll go and fire this off. And you'll note that the Cityworks as-built material has been updated. So I'll quickly jump back through my attachments here and grab that Cityworks link and bring that back up. A few things to note here. First off, the completed by has been set to my name. The actual finish date has been captured as that 12/9 date we put in. And then importantly over here on the asset-based side, note that there's now a number of assets that have been associated with this work order. And that's again because that GIS job has now been posted and those assets are available. Now I can go ahead and select all of these guys and we'll go and open up our Cityworks map view. And we'll flip back to the work order and I'll actually go ahead and highlight the selected assets on the map. And you can see here the selected assets along with those individual facility IDs that have been posted up via that job. And they're now available again in the Cityworks side and they are tied directly to this Cityworks work order. Now, the other piece to note here is that my material has gone up as far as my actual cost. So that's been passed over from the WFM side into Cityworks. So let's now go ahead and take a look at some of that detail behind the scenes here. Let me go into Elm, Equipment, Labor, and Material. This is my editor here within Cityworks, where again, we should already have the material populated. Now first scroll down and we'll check that out. And here we see the actual material here has been pushed over to Cityworks, and note where applicable, that individual material is tied to a specific asset ID as well as an asset type, and that's tying it into that GIS service side. And you can see as I flip through these different pages here, a lot of this has been taken care of for us, but it's been tied into those assets along with the asset IDs so that the material is now tied to that asset within the Cityworks system, tied back to the GIS asset. But note that my labor and my equipment is blank. Now SSP WFM doesn't ever really handle the capturing of labor and equipment. We leave that to either a timesheet system or a system like Cityworks that manages assets. So we'll go and add some of that detail in. I'm going to use the add cost module. So in here I'm going to use the crew Perry. We noted the crew Perry was the crew that did the work for this job, and we're going to put in 100 hours for Dean. Let's put in 30 hours for Joshua and 130 hours for Shauna. And then finally you see all the equipment here. To just add some quick costs, I'm going to put 20 hours on all the components of equipment across the board here. All right, so we've got all that equipment. We'll go and save this into the job now. If I scroll down once more, you'll now see that I have a labor, equipment, and material tied to this job. Now as I close Elm, flip back to the work order, I'll go ahead and click the work order button to refresh that. You'll see down below that we now have individual labor cost, equipment cost, material cost, and the total cost of the actual as-built job as $28,000. So we're in good shape. Now the final piece I would show you is that if we flip over to something like the labor, now we'll note before that we had the estimated side with these generic roles of apprentice line, crew foreman, and journeyman line. If I flip over to the actuals, you can see here that it's now been replaced by the actual people who did the work, Dean, Shauna, and Joshua, with their individual hours input. Of course, I just fake that out, but you get the idea of their costs and etc. So the other kind of interesting point, if I go back to the work order, is that I can now click this drop down and look at a cost summary. And this is a very interesting view where we can actually go down and see the actual versus the estimated labor costs, the equipment costs, and of course the material cost through and through. Now, the most important piece I care about is this overall section where I can see the actual cost came in at $28,000 and change, whereas the estimate was originally $32,000 and change. So we've actually beaten our estimates on this job, which is a great thing. But again, we can see all that information here inside of Cityworks. Let's flip back to that job that we were just looking at. And we'll leave it here for a moment. So again, we've attached the assets to the job, the actual material. We've now added our other information around the labor and equipment. And we're currently in a status of field complete, which again was passed over from WFM. Now our final status or challenge that we want to take care of here inside of WFM is to close this job out. And as you might have guessed, we have one final integration touch point. Now, as this job is refreshed here, you'll note a couple of things, including that the assignee is now unassigned, the fields are read-only, and that my work order is now set to closed. And one final time, if I go ahead and open up that attachment to the Cityworks work order, you'll note that the Cityworks work order is also been set to closed, and the closed by information has been captured accurately. So again, we're tying in WFM on the SSP side into a full-blown work order management side on the Cityworks side, which allows us an end-to-end workflow around designing work and handing off that as-built work into the asset management system. And then again, all of these assets would be subject to inspection and maintenance going forward within the Cityworks application, which is really what it does best. So hope you've enjoyed this interesting integration between the two systems as much as we have putting it together. Shoot us questions if you have them. Thanks for your time.